Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you a powerful tale of personal transformation, emotional healing, and the courage to break free from toxic family dynamics. In this story, Ava faces years of manipulation and sacrifice at the hands of her own family. But when the weight of it all becomes too much, she takes the brave step of walking away to reclaim her peace. It's a story about learning when enough is enough and choosing yourself over obligation. Stay tuned as we dive into this emotional journey of self-discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to begin today's story. It was Christmas Eve, and there I was, standing at the doorstep of the house I once called home. My breath formed clouds in the chilly air as I rang the doorbell. And for a moment, I hesitated. The light on the porch flickered just once before the door creaked open. And there it was, the familiar scent of pine and cinnamon. Just as it always was when we gathered for the holidays. But something had changed. I had changed. My mother's voice carried through the hallway. Her words almost too sweet. "Ava's here." It sounded like a scripted line. Rehearsed. Like she was trying too hard to make it sound like it was a genuine welcome. Inside, the house looked like it was straight out of a Hallmark movie. Warm lights glowing on the tree. The fire crackling softly. And everything perfectly in place. As if nothing had ever gone wrong. But beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. I placed the bottle of wine I brought on the table, Cabernet. One of the nicer bottles from my stash. Wrapped in a bow, as if I was still playing the part of the daughter they expected. I had foolishly hoped that this year would be different. That this time, I could somehow mend the broken pieces that had been scattered so recklessly over the years. But I knew, deep down, that nothing had really changed. The familiar faces around the table didn't seem to care about my presence. My father sat in his recliner, not bothering to get up. My sister Rachel, wearing that sly smile that she only wore when she thought she was winning, glanced at me as I took my seat. Neva, my youngest sister, was busy shaking a gift with her name on it. And there, in the middle of it all, was the picture-perfect disaster of our family. Dinner was already set, carved ham, roasted vegetables, and napkins folded with precision, as if each detail was meant to impress. Yet, beneath that well-crafted appearance, I could feel the cracks. No one asked how I had been. No one mentioned my promotion at work, or the fact that I had been working harder than ever to escape this toxic environment. The silence hung in the air like a heavy fog, filled only by the static of half-hearted conversation and forced laughter. Then, it happened. Rachel stood up, glass of wine in hand, that unmistakable gleam in her eyes. She was about to deliver her signature move, the one that always made everyone feel like they were part of a grand plan. "Before we cut the pie," she said with a grin, "I think it's time we got honest." My stomach turned. I knew what was coming. And I had already braced myself for it. But it still hit like a blow to the chest. She looked around the table, glancing at each of us as though she were some smug politician making a speech. "We voted, and we've decided," she said. "You're no longer part of this family." I blinked, unsure whether I had misheard her or if this was some cruel joke. But when I looked at my mother, she nodded in agreement. "It was bound to happen sooner or later," she said, her voice so casual, as if she were commenting on the weather. My father didn't even meet my gaze. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, muttering that this kind of tension wasn't healthy. Neva, in her usual naivete, giggled, thinking this was just a game. But it wasn't. I felt the coldness of their words pierce through me. Not like a knife. No. This was different. It was like standing outside in a storm without a coat, knowing that no one would come to let you in. Their rejection wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was the culmination of years of manipulation, of being drained emotionally, financially, and psychologically. I stayed silent, forcing myself to breathe through the rising storm in my chest. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick folder. The sound of it hitting the table sharp and deliberate. The laughter at the table faltered. Rachel's smile faltered, too, as she glanced at the folder. "What's that?" she asked. her voice dripping with mock curiosity. I leaned back, my voice steady but cold. Since we're being honest, I figured I'd come prepared. Rachel grabbed the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the pages. Expecting something trivial, perhaps a silly prank, but as she flipped through the bank transfers, receipts, and email screenshots, her face drained of color. Page after page, I watched as the facade crumbled. The timeline, the list of every time they had asked, begged, or guilt-tripped me for money, for favors, it was all there. And then she reached page 23. A hotel bill from Charleston. 2 nights, 1 room, signed with her name and someone else's, Lena. Her face twisted in disgust as she shoved the folder away. You psychopath, she hissed. But I didn't flinch. No, I said, my voice calm. I've been documenting. There's a difference. I could see my father's face. The confusion, the disbelief, as he took the folder from Rachel and began reading. His silence was deafening, and then, when he reached the final page, I heard the words I had been waiting to hear. Who is Lena? The storm, the quiet before the truth exploded, had finally arrived, and in that moment, everything shifted. The room was heavy with silence. The kind that settles in when something monumental has just been revealed. Rachel didn't speak, and neither did my mother. Their expressions were a mixture of disbelief and anger. But none of it seemed to reach me anymore. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't shocked. It was like I had already been prepared for this moment. The moment when I would finally stop being their emotional punching bag. Their ATM. Their therapist. It had taken years, but I had reached the breaking point. I stood up from my seat. My legs shaky but my resolve firm. I couldn't stay any longer. I didn't need their approval, their validation, or even their apology. They had made their choice. And now it was my turn to make mine. As I moved toward the door, I heard Rachel's voice call out, though it was far less smug than before. You're really going to walk out on us? I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I had already been walking away from them for years. But now, it felt different, final. Almost like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside. The gust biting through my coat. The street was quiet, the sounds of Christmas cheer muted in the distance. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep walking. Every step felt like a declaration. A reaffirmation that I was no longer that person they had used and discarded. The numbness I had carried inside for so long was beginning to fade. And for the first time in years, I felt free. As I walked, I thought about all the times I had given. The times I had sacrificed my own happiness to make them happy. To fix their problems, to make their lives easier. They had never asked for permission. Never once considered whether I could afford it, emotionally, physically, or financially. They had simply taken, and I had allowed it. Convincing myself that love meant giving until it hurt. But now, I knew the truth. Love didn't mean sacrificing everything for others while they took without hesitation. It meant having boundaries, knowing when to say no and respecting your own needs. I had always been the one to carry the weight of the family. The one they turned to when things went wrong. The one they leaned on. But in the process, I had lost myself. And now, finally, I was reclaiming what was mine. The first few days after I left were the hardest. I didn't know what to do with myself. With the silence that followed. The calls from my family were relentless. The messages piling up like unwanted junk mail. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. They hadn't respected me when I had given them everything. So why should I continue to give them my energy now? Then came the guilt. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, I had gone too far. Was I being too harsh? Was I being selfish? But I had learned to recognize that voice in my head. It was the same one that had kept me trapped for so long. The one that told me I wasn't allowed to put myself first. But this time, I didn't listen to it. One morning, my phone rang. It was a message from my sister Neva. The one who still believed in the fairy tale of family unity. I miss you. It read, please come home. For a moment, I was tempted. I thought about going back. about making everything right again. But then I remembered what had happened the last time I tried. I remembered the years of manipulation, the gaslighting, and the emotional exhaustion. I remembered how they never really saw me. Not as Ava, not as their daughter or sister, but as a tool to be used when convenient. No more. I didn't respond to Neva's message. Instead, I picked up my phone and sent a message to my lawyer. It was time to finalize everything, the severance, the accounts, the legal ties that bound me to them. It was time to put the past where it belonged, behind me. As I sat down to draft the necessary paperwork, I realized that for the first time in years, I was choosing peace. Peace over guilt. Peace over obligation. Peace over the false narratives they had spun around me. And as I looked out the window, watching the early morning light filter through the trees, I knew deep in my bones that I had made the right choice. I was done being the family fixer. I was done being their fallback. Now, I was finally living for me. And for the first time, I felt at peace. It had been a few weeks since I walked away, and the silence that had once felt like an impenetrable wall was now a strange companion. I had settled into my new apartment, a place that smelled like fresh paint and promise. The walls were bare, no family portraits, no old knick-knacks, just the clean, open space I needed to breathe. I had signed the lease shortly after the fallout, determined to create a life that wasn't overshadowed by the toxic presence of the family I had spent years trying to appease. And yet, despite all the space and freedom, there were moments when the weight of what I had left behind felt heavier than I expected. The guilt that came with walking away from my family would sometimes sneak in, wrapping itself around my chest in a vice grip. But I reminded myself, this was not betrayal. It was self-preservation. I wasn't the one who had broken the family. It had been broken long before I made the decision to leave. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights blink on one by one, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister, Rachel. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I should even open it. But curiosity won out. "We need to talk," it read. "Dad's not doing well. Please, just hear me out." The message stung. After everything, after the way they had treated me, rejected me, and dismissed me as a non-entity, they wanted me back because Dad was sick? They only reached out when they needed something, when it was convenient for them. And not once had they considered how I might have felt over the years. Not once had they acknowledged the sacrifices I had made, the pieces of myself I had given up. But still, something in me wavered. Maybe it was the part of me that still loved them, despite everything. Maybe it was the human part of me that wanted to be there when they needed me. Even though I knew they never truly needed me before. I sat there for a while, turning the phone over in my hand, contemplating the decision. Then, without thinking, I typed back, "I'm not the fixer anymore." As soon as I hit send, a wave of clarity washed over me. It wasn't that I didn't care about Dad, or even Rachel. It was just that I couldn't keep being the one who was always expected to make things right. I couldn't be the scapegoat for their failures, the one who was always expected to give more than I had left to give. The following days passed in a blur of emotional turbulence. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from various family members. They weren't apologies. No, they were demands for help, for support, for my presence. They wanted me to fix things, just like I always had. But I knew now, I had learned the hardest lesson of all, the difference between love and obligation. It wasn't until one evening, while I was scrolling through messages, that something in me clicked. I was no longer the person I had been. I wasn't the one who had always been silent, who had swallowed every insult and every manipulation for the sake of family unity. I had broken free from that. And though it had hurt, it had also given me a strength I never knew I had. I looked around at my new apartment, at the quiet, the freedom, and I realized that this was what peace looked like. It wasn't about fixing other people's problems or carrying their weight anymore. It was about choosing my own happiness, my own healing. And when the text from Rachel came again, this time asking if I could meet her, I didn't hesitate to decline. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I had simply outgrown the version of me they had tried to keep trapped. I had built a new life for myself, one that didn't involve living for others at the expense of my own well-being. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift As I sat in the stillness of my new life, a profound sense of relief washed over me. I had broken free from the chains that had bound me for so long. The expectations, the guilt, and the constant emotional toll that came with trying to be everything for everyone. The quiet of my apartment wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the peace I had longed for. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to please my family. Trying to fix everything for them, even when they never once considered what I needed. It wasn't betrayal to walk away, it was healing. I had learned that being strong wasn't about enduring endless sacrifice for others, but about knowing when to say enough and choosing your own well-being. The family's attempts to drag me back into their drama faded into the background. Their messages, their guilt trips, and their demands didn't matter anymore. I had given them enough. It was time to live for myself, to rebuild from the ground up, and to make the life I deserved. As I moved forward, I knew that my journey wasn't just about healing from the past, but about learning to live fully in the present. I had taken back control, and I wasn't afraid to walk away from anything that threatened my peace. If you've ever found yourself caught in a cycle of self-sacrifice and emotional exhaustion, remember that you deserve peace too. You're not selfish for drawing boundaries, and you are certainly not alone in this journey. So, if you found strength or clarity in this story, don't forget to subscribe to follow more life stories. You deserve to write your own chapter, too.